Hi, 4th grade! Chapter 27, Backward Logic. The next morning's breakfast was the last color-coded meal, and it sparked a realization of all the last things coming up. This was the last morning of Color War. After that would be the last few days of classes. Tonight, he and his bunkmates would learn their last digit of pi. And Saturday was the last day of Summer Center. 6 weeks of camp over in a blink. Gabe got a round of applause when he presented the red sand to C Squared during the designated scavenger hunt time. Aw. Hi, baby. Hi, Bubba. Scavenger hunt time. Maybe it was because he didn't want his teammates to know that he'd helped a blue team member. Or maybe it was because he was taking a cue from C Squared, who accepted the cup of sand without asking any questions. But Gabe decided to keep most of the details about his journey private. Nikhil thought it safer if he didn't know the specifics of how his bunkmate broke the rules, and Wesley was impressed just knowing that it had happened at all, so it wasn't too hard. Gabe had a flash of nervousness when he passed Amanda on the field, but all she did was shout, "Blue is the best!" When Jenny stuck her tongue out at him, he knew that Amanda hadn't told anyone about last night, either. The Color War battles ended with the scavenger hunt in the morning, but the official closing ceremony wasn't until after dinner. The administration spent the day tallying the scavenger hunt scores and divvying up points for sportsmanship and team spirit, and the campers had shortened sessions of each of their classes. They were only going to have 2 more days of school after this, and both Miss Carey and Mr. Justice said that those 2 days would be spent working on a final project to present to their families when they came to pick them up. The return to school was like the landing of another UFO. The focus and atmosphere of the whole camp shifted instantly. Instead of scoreboards and giant maps and mud pits, and the camp became filled with rocket launch pads and soil samples and even the beginnings of a replica of a medieval village. The excitement and competitive spirit was still there. It was just redirected. Gabe sat on a tree stump, his hair brushed forward and flipped up in the front, thinking about his final poem. Mr. Justice had taken the class out to the woods for inspiration, but Gabe's wasn't coming. He knew he wanted to write about camp, but that could mean anything that happened in the last 6 weeks. It was so big that he didn't know how to start, and he had no idea which of all his memories were even worth writing about. He'd had the same mental blank when thinking about his final logic proof. All he could think about was the personal logic proof he'd been working on all summer. He'd thought that all his adventures would prove that he wasn't a nerd, but they presented a stronger case for the opposite. Summer Center was one big adventure in geekdom. But was there any truth in what Amanda said? Did the geekdom part not necessarily cancel out the adventure? Mr. Justice knelt down beside Gabe's stump. "How's it coming, Gabe?" Gabe sighed. "I don't know what to write." "Do you know which form you'd like to write it in?" Mr. Justice asked. The final poem could be any type of poem they'd studied, and they'd studied lots. "No," Gabe said. "Maybe a haiku or a sonnet?" Mr. Justice smiled. "You like meter?" Gabe nodded. He did like poems that had set rules about how many lines or words or syllables you could use. "You have to make it fit," he said, "like the old wooden puzzles I had when I was little. There was this board with the outline, and you had to figure out which pieces went where to make it come together. Writing those poems is kind of like that." Mr. Justice nodded. "Kind of like a logic problem." "Yeah," Gabe said slowly. "It is kind of like a logic problem." Mr. Justice stood up and went to check in with someone else, leaving Gabe with all the neurons in his brain beginning to fire. He had a flashback of Amanda last night, sitting opposite him in her kayak and saying, "You always look at things backward." He could think of his poem like a logic problem, and his logic proof like a poem. Solving a logic problem meant taking a whole bunch of facts, givens, and combining them to come to one solution. But writing a poem was the opposite. You took a big thing, the woods, say, and broke it down into small things. The smell of leaves, the sound of the wind. Instead of looking at his nerd chart as a set of facts that needed to prove one thing or another, he began to look at it as a collection of memories and moments. when camp was over, he wouldn't have just one conclusion. He'd have all these fun and funny and crazy experiences. He could combine them to prove all sorts of different things or make any type of poem. And he'd remember every one of them. They were all him, more than any hairstyle was. He had a feeling he wouldn't be looking back at his logic proof anymore. Amanda walked behind Gabe's stump and looked over his shoulder at his blank piece of paper. "I'm almost done already," she bragged. Gabe looked up. "I'm just starting to get it." Chapter 28. "I think we won," said Wesley. "We should assume that we came in last place," said Nikhil. "That way we'll be sure to be happy with whatever place we came in." "We should hope we got first, though," said Gabe. His hair was not gelled at all, just plain and in need of a haircut. "Hope it. Okay," said Nikhil. "But be ready for any result, just in case." "I'm ready to win," said Wesley. The loudspeakers crackled and then began broadcasting the music of a violin quartet. It was a complicated, lively tune, and though some kids looked confused, and one stood up and began to wave his arms as though he were conducting, everyone stopped talking to listen. A procession started onto the stage. First the teachers, then the nurse and librarian, then the administrators, and finally the director of the camp. The staff formed a line at the top of the stage, and the director stood in the center wearing a red hat, a green shirt, blue shorts, and knee-high yellow socks. The music stopped, and all the campers applauded. Then the staff on stage began applauding too, but pointing their hands at the campers. "Welcome to the Color War closing ceremonies," the director said. "That wonderful music you just heard was Color War Opus in E-flat, composed and performed by Summer Center campers from 4 summers ago." Everyone clapped again. "Before I read the final scores and announce the winner," the director continued, "I'd like you all to give yourselves a huge round of applause. You all did an excellent job. What a stimulating, enriching, fun few days we've had." A couple of days ago, they all would have jumped to their feet and begun chanting cheers about their teams. But the scores were already tallied, and classes were already back in session. All anyone cared about now was the results. "Without further ado," the director said, "I have the Color War results." She pulled out a multicolored envelope, and a whole room full of bodies shifted closer to the edge of their seats. "The award for best sportsmanship goes to the Red Team." The Red Team cheered, but the other 3 teams cheered louder. Everyone knew the sportsmanship award never went to the team that had won. "The award for best team spirit goes to the Yellow Team." In honor of the Yellow Team's sing-off performance, she added in a robotic voice, "Or should I say the 10010 team?" "We had to win it," Wesley said excitedly. "That leaves just us in blue, and only we had the red sand." Gabe swallowed, but kept quiet. What were the odds that the red sand would make the difference between winning and losing? That his sharing with Amanda would push her team over the edge and leave green in second place? And now for the final scores. In 4th place, with 470 points, is the Red Team. The Red Team was clearly bummed, and they stayed that way despite their counselors pretending 4th was the best place to be. "I'm going to have to announce the rest in a somewhat different way," the director said, "because we had something incredibly rare happen. We have 2 teams tied for 2nd place, with 525 points each." A symphony of murmurs and whispers went through the crowd. "But the winning team," the director paused and let the suspense hang there, "won us over with their team spirit and sportsmanship and fantastic sing-off performance. With 655 points, it's the Yellow Team." The Yellow Team sprang to their feet and began screaming and jumping on top of one another. "Tied for 2nd, Nikhil said proudly. "I was expecting 4th. Wesley kicked the seat in front of him. "I can't believe we came in 2nd, and then we tied with blue." "At least we beat red," Gabe said, resigned. "And they knew about the milk snake." Wesley covered his eyes. Watch out, Gabe. Here comes Amanda Wisniewski, and she's probably going to say we copied her by coming in second. Gabe couldn't help but laugh, even as he shook his head. What she should do was thank him. If he hadn't shared his sand, Blue would be third to Green second. But she probably would say exactly what Wesley predicted. She tapped him on the shoulder. We tied. You know what that means? She said. Gabe and Wesley and Nikhil waited. Amanda smiled. We're meant to be. All right, and I'll be reading the end of the book next week. We will have to decide as a class from the books that I have at home, or if people have suggestions, what book we should do for our next read aloud. Bye, guys!